and welcome everyone. Thank you. I'm in Europe now, so this is evening for me. Whatever time it is for you, thank you for joining us. And please let me take a few minutes of your time today evening so that I can talk you through some ideas I have. This is going to be a bit more of an esoteric topic compared to the way that Vinicius talked about pretty specific details. For me, I'm coming at web performance, or more accurately, I'll be talking about sort of a bit more of an architectural topic, and I'll tell you why I'm interested in it. Um, so my name is Keerthana. I am from a place called Cochin in India. Currently, I'm based in Munich, Germany, and have been a software engineer for the last almost 7 odd years. And I have been working and building mobile applications, web applications, and I actually just try into performance stuff. Like, probably there are people in this call who's much more experienced with web perf than I do, but it's something that I really noticed the difference in how websites behaved in when I was in India versus how some of the sort of interactions were in Germany. And I started learning more about, hey, some things is just faster here. What's the deal? So before I get in deep with my thoughts, I wanted to start off with this story I have. So my father is a physicist. He loves to make dumb physicist jokes. And there's this one he keeps telling us about how a farmer approached a bunch of people. Hey, how can I make my chickens lay more eggs? And I swear this comes to a point soon. So he talked to an archaeologist, he talked to a biologist, he talked to a doctor, and finally it was the physicist that said, I can give you a solution for a problem if you have a very spherical chicken kept in a vacuum. And especially when we talk about some cases in performance, I feel like we really come with this physicist in a vacuum chicken approach towards performance. Whenever I read about some stuff in documentation and things like that, it's because it's always nice to think about performance in an ideal case. Like, yeah, it's very ideal to have this much score for ALCP, this much score for CLS, and you always want to have your interactivity come really quickly, and you want to have your videos, you want to have your images, you want to have everything in your website, but nothing penalizes the scores for the core web vitals. So how can I have my chickens? How can they lay more eggs? And how can I have my spherical chickens when it comes to my web performance? And so this was I just realized I did not put a link to this. I have to search and find a link for this, but I swear this is an actual data I found. I think it was from Annie Sullivan. When I was reading one of her articles, I just screenshotted this a while back. Um, so if you I hope you guys can still see my slides. And I come from one of the areas which used to be orange, now it's a bit more green, but I definitely know people who still live in the orange green, uh, slightly going to green areas. And when you are there and when you're working on websites and products in those areas, it really you really do feel the difference of how much more it takes for the user experience to be better, how much more it takes for the performance to be better. And as you have a penalization of your core web vital scores, it does affect how you show up in your Google search and your search indexing and things like that. So it is something that I feel like software engineers everywhere try to do, but it might be easier in some places when you have things like better connectivity. You have uh, ah, I cannot find the right word. It's just coming up as Cloudflare in my brain, but you know what I'm talking about. Your CDNs, CDNs. When you have CDNs that give you faster requests and things like that, and that some places, or it could be that you have a company which is much more smaller and just cannot afford a CDN. You're just starting to find clients. So I have worked with different kinds of people who have been trying to get into the web and set up a SaaS product and things like that. And so whenever people approach me and ask me about, hey, I hear you talk about this stuff and you build stuff, how can I make my website faster? And I'm like, so what are your constraints? And then they start out with, so I live in this small place in India. I have this five mobile phones that I check stuff with. And I'm like, okay, so what is your server capacity? How much do you want to invest in your AWS? And you start out with constraints and you realize, this this might not have all the ideal situations that I want to when you get into it. So the question is, if you start out at a disadvantage for web performance, what can you do to improve your standing from there? So I hope everybody's gotten into that zone. And when I talk about get starting at a disadvantage, this is what I mean. And this, I think, I just took today morning from the web.dev website. So I think everybody here should be really familiar with these numbers. And the last time I was home in India, I checked, and I'm pretty sure it was LinkedIn. I When I was trying to access LinkedIn in 3G, I can tell you it took me way more than 3 seconds. So in 3G, LinkedIn is not hitting any of these metrics that we would consider very good for web performance, and that's a pretty big website, I would say. So if you are starting at a disadvantage and these are the ideal metrics that we want to get into, and we just accept, okay, I'm never going to hit ideal, how can we build websites and minimize the kind of damage that we do when it comes to web performance? Like, so how can we build websites um, considering that we will always not be hitting the ideals that we have defined in our domain? So here are some contributing factors. Now, I know when I talk to people in Germany, especially about things like load shedding or um, uh, disruptions in the power network, that's not something that software engineering teams here kind of prepare for, but that is something that happens a lot in different parts of the world. Uh, I don't want to name names because I can only speak from my experience is coming from India, but I do know that there are places definitely in um, I have a friend in South Africa who I talk to. She deals with this. I have friends in Kenya. So connectivity disruptions and power outages are a real factor in a lot of, especially emerging markets. So we clearly have large markets for websites in what we call the Western world, which is in Europe and America. But you have to imagine there are like up and coming markets where the average age of a user in markets like South Asia or Africa are much more younger. So they're much more interested in getting into websites. So there are much more people trying to build newer web applications in these markets. And there are these initial challenges that they face even before they bring any kind of product into market. And this added on with challenges in infrastructure. So what I talked earlier about how you have a limited number of software engineers, of course, to build it, but you also have a limited number of for example, towers which give you high speed connections, and you have a large number of people, like the population density in proportion to the number of infrastructure that you have to support the kind of internet access that you need to give the kind of speed, things like that. And one other thing that I would like to point out is also the hardware that you have for development. So I'm assuming that all of us here, when we develop our software, we have pretty high-powered laptops, and we also, to an extent, when you're using a large SaaS product, you're accessing it from a laptop if you're a software engineer. But for the average user, especially in these markets, a lot of them are really like skipping forward, not even using a laptop or a PC, and they skip directly to a mobile device. So here are some of the most famous mobile devices. I'm not sure if you guys can zoom in and see, but I'll cut the chase. It's a lot of Chinese made devices. They're quite popular because China is a huge manufacturer for lower end phones, which are not iPhones. Mostly they're Android phones, and The thing is, what they're doing is they're essentially making these hardware easier, and for people who do not have basically the economic capacity to spend on a larger or much more robust MacBook or even a PC, which a Lenovo, Acer, whatever it is, they have now access to the internet through their mobile phones. And it could be a tiny little mobile phone, but it's theirs, and they have their 3G phone, and that's how they connect to the internet. And henceforth, they want to see what all the fuss is all about, right? When it's really unique for me that on one hand, everybody I talk to in one universe, they're also excited about what is AI going to do, how do I build with AI. And I also know people on the other end who are like, okay, I got my first phone now, and I'm really excited to build stuff and access um, news alert, because they're hitherto in a place where they did not have access to the internet. So it's really exciting what how big the world is in some aspects. And I don't have a photo of it here. I'll give you an example for this. So my grandfather, he's actually in his 90s. He's 91, and 2 years ago, my grandfather, I gave him my old phone. It was an Android phone, and as you can imagine, he had heard of this new thing called an Airbnb, and he wanted me to install my Airbnb, the app, onto my old, very old Android phone. It was not a phone that was compatible with Airbnb, the current version of the app. But for my grandfather, he couldn't understand why. Well, it's a mobile app and this is a mobile phone. Why couldn't you install it? So trying to explain to a 90-year-old where version compatibility was really not on my bingo card in 2022. There were bigger problems in life. But you can imagine, if there's one person thinking about things like that, there are definitely more people thinking about things like that. So we have mobile first markets emerging, and PCs have been skipped entirely as means to connect to the internet. That's kind of what I was trying to get into. I promised to break up stuff with memes. So here's your first meme. So, what happens when you have the internet, you have access to stuff, you don't have the correct infrastructure, you're trying to access a product that was built for a market which supports much more faster internet, but it's just not working for you? What do you do then? Well, I guess I might really not want to have access to this product. It's taking too much time for me to load. I will try something else. Maybe it needs to be, it's not just to the level where I am patient enough to wait for this thing yet. So if I expect the internet connectivity to take time, if I expect things to be bad, how much patience do I have? Like what is in me to wait for the internet, and how do I make this experience better? That is kind of what I was trying to lead into. So this is the first part of it, and next I'll be sharing with you some of the insights that I have gotten based on these conditions, on how you can make some decisions for users who might be experiencing something like this. What I want to say is it's definitely not exhaustive in any way. These are just things that I've experienced, things that I've noticed, and I'm sure across my experience, I'll probably be updating this list. But yeah, I hope if this helps at least one person here to think about decisions and help in their architecture the next time you're building, I will be happy and I will take that as a win. So here's a sample website, and I know that I've cropped out a bunch of stuff, so you have no idea what application this belongs to, and you're just seeing this for the first time. But just take a look, and I think even in the first glance, you can see like, okay, there's some kind of delivery happening here. It's very clear the date of the next delivery, some kind of counting is happening. Here you go. There is a link if I need an emergency, and so you see how even if this is an application that you have no idea what this is, the way the data is arranged, to an extent it is of course a design choice, but it's also the way in which the user gets access to the most important information first, right? If I have some kind of an application where I'm expecting some kind of delivery, something like that, if I am the user, the first thing that I might care about is when is my next delivery. So when you're delivering the data for that, I'm sure we all have faced cases where you are designing an API and you have one API call that gives you the data for the next delivery, which is probably a much more shorter API request, but you probably have one more API call that you can give all of the wallet information that you can. Here's your order history or something like that, which probably has a lot more data. So it really does come down to engineering decisions on, if I have a very limited kind of a bandwidth, and if I am going to fetch all of the data to show my order history, how can I break it up so that the user gets the most important information first? You know, um, I hope you can see from the examples that I'm bringing in here. So, key about that is, of course, make sure that the user gets the most critical info first. You can always have the next thing that's coming in, the user, once you deliver what the user needs the most, they'll probably have more patience for waiting for the rest of the stuff, especially for some more mission critical stuff that your app is trying to give them. Of course, you this comes back to the fundamental principle of web performance. You always want to optimize what the initial render is. You want the browser to like work as efficiently as possible. And in this case, of course, the next delivery is the most critical part of the entire application. Half the time, you always come to results like this based on whatever user data analytics you have. It's not just based on guesswork. I'm sure that whatever kind of software engineering model you're working from, you have your A/B testing, you have your product testing, and you get your feedback from from your user about what are the most 80% information that the user is always looking for. But yeah, when you're delivering it from an engineering perspective, also think about how fast you can do that. And essentially, this comes down to first the MVP, and it takes higher priority when you have sort of the limitations of bandwidth and speed and patience coming into play. Um, so coming back to the key point I had about the patience that the user has. Another thing is, if you have something, an API request or something like that, that is taking time, we of course have the standard practice of having some kind of a loading screen or something like that. But it's also, this is where another more than an engineering practice, I guess, is a bit more about speaking to the human brain, right? Keeping the user up to date on, hey, what is going on? How can the user take some kind of action? Like, if there is nothing the user can do, they simply have to wait it through until this entire update goes through with it. Or when can the user know if an error has happened or if a success has happened? Like, keeping the user up to date on what the status is and what is to be expected, and letting them know that nothing has gone wrong, that could be the best way to approach something like that, giving the user clarity about the situation. Because at the end of the day, we have to assume that our users are looking to us to keep them sort of reassured on what the status quo is. Um, so current what is the current status of the system? What is essentially, what does the user have to do next if something goes wrong? Giving that kind of clear feedback to the user is ultimately what can help the user, um, keep their patience, as to say. So here's another example that I found that I really enjoyed. Again, this was something I was dealing with my parents. They wanted to take some travel recently, and I suggested to them, why don't you just download it on Google Maps? And of course, as parents do, they did not do it when they were home. They tried doing it when they were traveling at the last minute, while they had mobile data. And but I saw this in their mobile phones, and that's why I took the screenshot. And I thought it was a really cool thing to give that kind of a feedback. And I hope this kind of clarifies the steps that I was mentioning earlier. There's clear and present feedback at once when it's downloading and it's at 32%. There's nothing really you can do. You really have to wait until it's 100%, or you can just delete it off, I guess, but you've already reached the point of 32%. So this really illustrates everything I was speaking about earlier. It's about giving the clear and present feedback to the users, letting them know what the current status of the system is, and letting them know, okay, if something has gone wrong, if you don't have access to the internet, some kind of error has happened, giving them that kind of a feedback. So hopefully this is a visual cue for what I was trying to say. Another part of it is, of course, that you let the users feel like they have in control whatever interaction they have. It creates some kind of an output. When you're clicking that delete button, it does something. If you're going to click the download button, it does something. It lets the user know, okay, whatever action I've done, it that means something. The next part, of course, is also take into account the digital literacy of the user. And this is again something that people who are used to the internet, the customs of the internet, what they expect. You have an expectation of what it does when you right click it, and you have that kind of digital literacy built in. But when you're dealing with a new kind of market and people who are not used to what these things do, taking into account what the digital literacy of your expected user is and helping them familiarize with what is going to happen is also a pretty good shot that it helps. Uh, it's not exactly a performance thing, but it's helping your user understand and getting into dealing with a website. So here's another example. I'm sorry if all of my examples are like Google related, but I do find it interesting. So again, all of my examples are also family themed. Every time I see something about AI, most of my family tree is also now excited about ChatGPT and all the new AI buzzwords that they keep hearing. And I thought that when I saw this, it was like, yeah, if you're not confident about dealing with an AI like Gemini, this would be nice. I would like to know more about it and read more about it and get keeping thinking about how your user would want to know about this. I think it's a really good idea. So um, real world conventions are, of course, things that you want to emulate in your digital products. And this is also what I talked about when it comes to like digital literacy, right? You want to have your users think about something they've already done and connect with what they have already done previously. One of the last things that I want to talk about in this designing part is discouraging damaging actions. Now, this might be the most important thing. So, the classic example for this would be you have clicked something and you're clicking multiple times. You're like click, 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 click. You don't have a debounce in effect or something like that, or you have a submit that you've clicked multiple times, and that just creates a whole bunch of requests in already a situation where you don't have the time or the bandwidth to have one request, right? So discouraging those kind of damaging actions. Do not let your user, for example, um, log out when you're offline, things like that. um, Avoiding your user making dangerous and damaging actions. And of course this comes from a lot of like testing, seeing what kind of things your users do. We're never going to be able to like 100% fix what your user does, and fix and kind of predict all the ways in which our users do interesting things. But yeah, in the longer term, sort of testing all the different ways in which things can get screwed up, and minimizing the amount of dangerous actions that a user can do, I think is really key in dealing with these scenarios where you already start out with some challenging um, uh, limitations, and you want to build and give high performance websites for your users. So I know that we are in a performance observer call, so I wouldn't want to stop with only some like vague kind of design uh, s- sort of suggestions. So What more can we do? Hey, improve your LCP, reduce your image size. I would like to give a couple of more comments, a bit more concrete about what you can do. So the first thing is, the fundamental of how to build when you have limitations comes down to three things. You reduce the number of requests that you have, you reduce the size of each request, and you try to reduce the distance the request has to travel. Right? Those are the fundamental three things. And we all know that the amount of the way in which you can decrease all three of these, the better the performance will be. Now, how you do it is always going to be ever evolving, I think. I can give you a silver bullet list right now, but we all know, like, in 2 months there's gonna be a different technique to do things. So just keep in mind of these kind of things and techniques in which you can do it. And I think that that's something that's always going to be ever evolving when it comes to web performance. So when it comes to reducing the number of requests, of course, you can cache stuff, you can use your BF cache. I am keeping an eye on the time, and I wish I had time to say more things, but I think Sia would not want me to go deep into that, so I'm going to move ahead. um, I did have something a bit more planned for resource hints, and I think everybody here, you guys know what they are, how to use them. Don't don't forget your cross origin attribute that creates a lot of problems. Stuff like that, real basic stuff, but you would be surprised the number of time that makes a really big difference. Um, I did not create the statistic. I basically stole this, but I still think it's really important that we keep in mind, when it comes to context, there are people who have really big teams that still mess up the really small stuff, right? So if you mess up on the small stuff, just don't worry about it. Keep, tracking your performance number, see where you are, and just keep improving it. Everybody makes mistakes. This slide is just to tell you there are other people who make mistakes. um, and again, from the HTTP archive, when it comes to resource hints, there are people who preload stuff, a lot of things which never get used. So again, if you're making mistakes, just figure out where they are. Don't worry about it. And just before I conclude, I hope some of these things that I've talked to you about, these examples have given you an idea of what it's like to step out of probably the zone in which your products are currently being used by users. Even if you have a user who may not be based in India, right? I'm sure there are pockets across wherever your market is which have low connectivity, right? If, for example, the company I currently work for, we built a software that's used by movie studios. So when they are on set, we do have conditions where you don't have good accessibility. I'm sorry, not accessibility, good, yeah, I guess internet accessibility, right? So all of these things that I spoke about still come into play, right? So improving the internet for any case, I think, applies in more places than it actually we can think about in the outset. Um, that's it from my side. Thank you for listening to my thoughts and ramblings for the last, I guess, 25 minutes.